The transport ship came out of hyperspace above a world that looked like it was made of black glass, and Commander Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the small window to get a better look at the planet that might become her grave throne world. Galaxis hung in the darkness of space like a dark jewel, its surface covered in massive structures that rose toward the sky like the teeth of some great beast. And Elena felt her heart beating faster as she watched the city lights spread across the dark continents below. She had read about this place in the files that the Volanthi had given to humanity after the conquest, and she knew that millions of beings from hundreds of species lived down there, all of them serving the will of the immortal Queen Selithra. 3 years ago, humanity had thought itself alone in the universe, and 3 years ago, humanity had been free. The Volanthi had come without warning, their great warships appearing in Earth's sky like dark clouds blocking out the sun. And within 6 months, every human military force had been crushed, every government had surrendered, and every person on Earth had learned the bitter truth that they were not the masters of their own fate anymore. Elena remembered the day the ships came, and she remembered watching from her military base as the sky turned dark with alien vessels. And she remembered the feeling of complete helplessness as she realized that everything humanity had built meant nothing against such power. Now she was here, on a ship, heading toward the most dangerous place in the Volanthi Dominion, chosen to represent her entire species in an ancient ritual that she barely understood. The door behind her opened with a soft hiss, and a Volanthi overseer stepped into the observation room, his tall gray body moving with the strange grace that all of his kind seemed to possess. "Human," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone speaking to a small and unimportant creature. "We will land in 1 hour, and you will be taken to the registration chamber with the other champions." Elena turned to face him, and she noticed how his 4 eyes looked at her with something between curiosity and contempt, as if he could not quite believe that such a small and soft creature had been sent to compete in the arena. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. The overseer made a sound that might have been laughter, and his thin mouth curved into what she had learned to recognize as a Volanthi smile. "Your species is brave to send anyone at all," he said, "but we expected something more impressive for your first champion, perhaps one of your larger males, or one of your genetic experiments that we have heard rumors about." Elena did not respond to the insult, and she simply looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in the past 3 years to be bothered by words. "I volunteered," she said simply. The overseer's 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that showed surprise, and he tilted his head to one side as he studied her more closely. "Volunteered," he repeated, as if the word was strange to him. "Your kind must not understand what happens in the arena if someone would choose to come here." "I understand perfectly," Elena said, and she turned back to the window to watch the planet growing larger as they descended. "That is exactly why I am here." The overseer stood in silence for a long moment, and then he left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Elena let out a long breath and pressed her palm against the cold glass of the window. And she thought about all the people back on Earth who were counting on her, all the families who had lost loved ones in the conquest, all the children who would grow up under alien rule if nothing changed. She was not the strongest human, and she was not the smartest or the most skilled in combat. And she knew that by every measure the Volanthi used to judge worth, she was nothing special at all, but she had something that the aliens did not understand. Something that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them. And that something was the simple refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Galaxis, and Elena watched as the black glass surface of the planet rushed up to meet them, and she made herself a promise that whatever happened in the days to come, she would not bring shame to her people. when the ship finally landed on a platform that jutted out from one of the great black towers. Elena gathered her small bag of belongings and walked toward the exit ramp with her head held high. The air of Galaxis was thin and cold, and it carried a strange smell that reminded her of metal and something else she could not name. And she had to take a moment to adjust to the different gravity that made her feel slightly heavier than normal around the landing platform. She could see other ships arriving, each one carrying a champion from one of the many species that the Volanti had conquered over the thousands of years of their Empire A. Massive creature made of what looked like living crystal stepped off a nearby ship, its body catching the light of the distant sun and throwing rainbows across the dark stone of the platform. And Elena guessed that this must be one of the Mordrith that she had read about in her briefings. From another ship came a group of beings with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished bronze, their bodies covered in scars that spoke of many battles. And she knew these must be the Keshan warriors who were bred from birth to fight and kill. Everywhere she looked, she saw creatures that were bigger than her, stronger than her, and more prepared for combat than she could ever hope to be. And she felt a moment of doubt creep into her heart. A Volanti official approached her with a device in his hand, and he looked at her with the same expression of amused contempt that she had seen on the face of the overseer on the ship. Name and species, he said in a bored voice. Elena Vasquez, human. She answered. The official made a note on his device and then looked up at her with a cruel smile spreading across his face. Ah, yes. The humans, he said loudly enough for the nearby champions to hear. The soft creatures made of water and weak flesh who could not even defend their own world for a single year. Several of the other champions turned to look at her, and she could see the pity in some of their eyes and the mockery in others. And she knew that they all expected her to fail and die in the trials to come. Your species will be mining asteroid graves for 10,000 years. The official continued, assuming you survive long enough to speak before the Queen, which you will not. Elena looked at him without expression, and she felt the eyes of dozens of champions watching to see how she would react to this humiliation. She thought about responding with anger, and she thought about defending her people with words. But in the end, she simply nodded once and walked past him toward the registration chamber, her boots making steady sounds against the black stone of the platform behind her. She heard the official laugh and make another comment about weak humans, but she did not turn around or slow her pace, and she kept walking until she entered the great doors of the chamber where her fate would be decided inside. The registration chamber was vast and dark, lit only by floating orbs of pale light that drifted near the ceiling like strange stars. And Elena took her place among the other champions who had gathered there to learn the rules of the arena. She was the smallest being in the room, and she was surrounded by creatures who could crush her with a single blow or kill her with powers she could not even understand. But she stood among them without showing fear. Somewhere in this dark tower, the immortal Queen Celiithra sat upon her throne and watched. And somewhere in the days ahead, Elena would face trials that would test everything she was made of. But for now, she simply stood and waited, a small human woman among giants, ready to show the galaxy what her people were truly capable of. The first trial began at dawn, though there was no true sun on Galaxis. Only the pale glow of artificial light that spread across the sky when the Volanti decided it was time for their subjects to wake Elena, had slept very little in the small cell they had given her. And she had spent most of the night thinking about what was to come and whether she would live to see another day. 60 champions had gathered in the arena when the announcement came, and they stood in rows on the black sand while a Volanti official explained the rules of the trial of endurance in a voice that carried no emotion at all. Each champion will be sealed in a chamber designed to test the limits of their physical form, the official said. And the chambers will simulate the harshest conditions your species can survive. And then they will become worse, much worse, Elena looked at the row of metal doors that lined one wall of the arena, each one leading to a chamber that had been designed specifically to break the champion who entered it. You may surrender at any time by pressing the release panel inside your chamber, the official continued. But know that surrender means your species loses all standing in the negotiations, and your people will serve the Dominion in the lowest positions for the next 10,000 years. The champions began to move toward their assigned chambers, and Elena walked with them, her heart pounding in her chest, but her face showing nothing of the fear she felt inside. The Mordrith champion, a massive creature of living crystal whose name she had learned was Kale, walked past her with heavy steps that shook the ground, and he did not even glance in her direction as he entered his chamber. The Keshan warriors moved with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat, their forearms swinging at their sides as they laughed and joked about how easy this trial would be for their kind. Elena found her chamber and stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb being sealed, and she was alone in the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened, and she stood in the black emptiness and tried to slow her breathing and prepare herself for whatever was coming. Then the heat began. It started as warmth, like stepping outside on a summer day, but it grew quickly until the air itself seemed to burn, and Elena felt her skin turning red as sweat poured from every part of her body. She had trained for heat, and she knew that humans could survive temperatures that would kill many other species. But this was beyond anything she had experienced in her preparation. The walls of the chamber glowed orange with the heat they were producing, and Elena dropped to the floor where the air was slightly cooler, and she focused on controlling her breathing and keeping her heart rate steady. Hours passed, or what felt like hours, and just when she thought the heat could not get any worse, the chamber suddenly turned cold. The change was so sudden that it felt like being plunged into ice water, and Elena gasped as her sweat-soaked body began to shake uncontrollably in the freezing air. She curled into a ball and wrapped her arms around herself, and she thought about the stories her grandmother had told her about the old days, about humans who had survived ice ages and frozen wastelands with nothing but fire and determination. The cold cut through her like knives, and she could feel her fingers and toes going numb, and she knew that if she stayed still too long, her body would start to shut down. So she moved, and she forced her shaking legs to carry her back and forth across the small chamber, and she rubbed her arms and stamped her feet to keep the blood flowing back and forth. The temperature swung from burning heat to freezing cold and back again, and each cycle seemed worse than the one before, and Elena lost track of time as she fought just to stay alive. At some point, she started bleeding from her ears, a sign that the pressure changes were affecting her body in ways she could not control. But she wiped the blood away and kept moving. She thought about surrendering, and she thought about how easy it would be to press the release panel and make the pain stop. But every time that thought came into her mind, she pushed it away with memories of home. She thought about her mother, who had died in the first wave of the Volanthi attack, and she thought about her younger brother, who was now working in a factory under alien supervision, and she thought about all the people who were depending on her to give them hope. 42 hours passed before the chamber finally went dark, and the door opened with a soft hiss. Elena stumbled out into the arena on legs that could barely hold her weight, and she saw that she was not alone, that other champions had also survived the trial and were emerging from their chambers in various states of damage, but many chambers remained sealed. And as she watched, Volanthi workers began to open those doors and remove the bodies of champions who had not been strong enough to endure. 17 champions had died in the trial of endurance, their bodies broken by the extremes of heat and cold and pressure. And Elena felt a moment of sorrow for them, even though she had not known their names. Of Volanthi medic approached her and scanned her body with a device that hummed softly, and the medic's 4 eyes widened slightly at what the device showed. "You should not be standing," the medic said with something like surprise in its voice. "Your internal temperature fluctuated beyond what our records show humans can survive." Elena looked at the medic with eyes that were red from burst blood vessels and said, "Your records are wrong." She did not wait for a response but walked toward the recovery area where the surviving champions were gathering. And she found a corner where she could sit and rest her aching body. The second trial came 2 days later, and it was called the Trial of Pain. The champions were taken to a room filled with metal chairs, each one connected to a device that the Volante explained would send signals directly to their nervous systems, making them feel pain without causing any physical damage. "Pain is the great equalizer," the official announced. "It does not matter how strong you are or how well armored your body might be, because pain speaks to the mind directly, and the mind can always break." Elena sat in her chair and felt the cold metal restraints close around her wrists and ankles. And she watched as the other champions were similarly bound. The Keshan champion in the chair next to her laughed out loud. And he said, "My people are bred to feel no pain. This trial will be nothing to me." Across the room, Kale the Mordrith sat calmly in his chair, his crystal body showing no sign of fear. And Elena knew that his mineral form would protect him from much of what was to come. Then the trial began, and Elena felt pain like she had never imagined possible. Pain that seemed to fill every part of her body and mind until there was nothing else in the universe. She screamed, and she was not ashamed of screaming, because there was no shame in acknowledging that something hurt when it hurt this much. The Keshan champion stopped laughing very quickly, because the device knew how to find pain even in those who thought themselves immune. And soon he was screaming till time lost all meaning in the trial of pain. And Elena did not know if minutes or hours were passing. And she only knew that the agony continued without end, and that the release panel was right there on the arm of her chair. She could stop it with a single touch, and she could make the pain go away and never feel this terrible thing again. And her hand moved toward the panel more than once, but she did not press it. And when the trial finally ended, she was still in her chair with tears streaming down her face and her throat raw from screaming of Volante. Official walked among the survivors and stopped in front of Elena with a look of confusion on his gray face. "How did you endure that?" he asked. "You have no natural resistance to pain. You have no mental shields. You should have surrendered within the first hour." Elena looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be intimidated by his question. "I thought about everyone back home who has already suffered worse under your rule," she said, "and I decided that I was not going to give up when they could not." The official stared at her for a long moment, and then he walked away without another word. And Elena knew that she had confused him in a way that he did not like. The third trial was called the Trial of Sacrifice, and it was different from the others because it tested not the body but the soul. Each champion was offered a choice in a private room, and the choice was simple but terrible. And Elena faced it alone with only a Volante judge watching her. "You may betray one other champion of your choosing," the judge said, "and if you do, that champion will face additional hardship in the final trial while you will receive an advantage. Or you may refuse, and you will face punishment while the champions you could have betrayed will never know of your kindness." Elena did not hesitate, and she said, "I refuse." The judge looked at her with something almost like respect, and then said, "You are the only champion who has made this choice, and you will suffer for it." "I know," Elena said, "but I will suffer with a clean conscience, and that is worth more to me than any advantage." She left the room knowing that whatever punishment awaited her, she had done the right thing, and that was something no one could ever take away from her. The recovery chambers beneath the arena were cold and dark, lit only by strips of blue light that ran along the walls like frozen rivers. And Elena lay on her metal bed and stared at the ceiling while her body tried to heal from the punishment she had received for refusing to betray the other champions. The Volanti had been creative in their cruelty, and they had denied her food for 2 days while forcing her to watch the other champions eat. And they had made her run laps around the arena until her legs gave out. And they had done other things that she did not want to remember, but she had survived. And now she lay in her chamber and listened to the sounds of the other champions in their own rooms nearby. And she thought about what was still to come. The final trial was only 3 days away, and she knew it would be combat, champions fighting. Champions until only one remained standing to speak before the queen. And she knew that in any fair fight, she had no chance of victory against the warriors and creatures that surrounded her. Sound came from the chamber next to hers, a strange grinding noise that she had come to recognize as the voice of Cale de Mordreth. And she realized that he was in pain. She got up from her bed slowly, her legs still weak from the trials, and she walked to the wall that separated their chambers and pressed her ear against the cold metal. "Cale," she called, softly. "Are you injured?" There was silence for a moment, and then the grinding voice came again, and this time she could understand the words. "My limbs are shattered," Cale said. "2 of them broke during the trial of pain when my crystal body could not contain the signals they sent through my nerves. And Mordreth heals slowly, too slowly, and I will not be ready for the final trial." Elena thought about this, and she knew that among any other group of champions, an injured competitor would be left to die, because that was one less opponent to face in the arena. But she was not like the other champions, and she was not going to let someone suffer when she might be able to help. "I am coming to your chamber," she said, and she did not wait for a response before walking out into the corridor that connected the recovery rooms. A Volanti guard looked at her with suspicion as she passed, but there was no rule against champions visiting each other, and so he let her go without stopping her. Cale's chamber was larger than hers because his crystalline body needed more space, and when she entered, she found him lying on a platform of smooth stone with 2 of his limbs cracked and dark where they should have been bright and whole. "Why are you here, human?" Cale asked, and his voice carried the weariness of someone who had given up hope. Elena knelt beside him and looked at the damaged limbs, and she thought about everything she had learned about crystal structures during her training, and everything she knew about human field medicine. "I want to help you," she said simply. Cale made a sound that might have been laughter, and his remaining functional limbs moved in a gesture she did not understand. "Help me," he repeated. "You cannot repair crystal, human. Only time can do that, and I do not have enough time." Elena reached into the small bag she had brought with her and pulled out strips of thermal wrapping that she had saved from her own medical supplies, and she began to carefully wrap them around Cale's damaged limbs. "I cannot repair the crystal," she admitted, "but I can hold it together and keep it warm, which should help it heal faster. And I can keep you company while you rest, because sometimes the best medicine is knowing that someone cares." Cale watched her work with eyes that glowed like embers in his crystal face, and he did not speak for a long time. When she had finished wrapping his limbs, she sat back and looked at him, and she saw that his light was a little brighter than it had been before. "Why?" Cale finally asked. "Why would you help me when I am your enemy? When we will have to fight each other in the final trial, when everything about this arena is designed to make us hate each other." Elena smiled, and it was the first real smile she had felt since arriving on Calaxis. "You are not my enemy," she said. "The Volanti are my enemy. The system that forces us to fight each other is my enemy. But you are just someone else they have conquered. Someone else who has lost their home and their freedom. Someone else who is trapped in this terrible place." Cale was silent again, and Elena could see that her words had affected him in ways he did not know how to express. "My people have a saying," she continued, "that a burden shared is a burden halved. And I believe that if we help each other instead of fighting each other, we might all have a better chance of surviving this." Word of what Elena had done spread through the recovery chambers faster than she expected, carried by whispers and glances between champions who had never spoken to each other before. The next day, a champion she did not recognize came to her chamber, a tall being with silver skin and eyes that seemed to look in two directions at once. And this champion introduced herself as Siren of the Velith. "I heard what you did for the Mordrith," Siren said, and her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "And I wanted to meet the being who would show kindness in a place designed to destroy kindness." Elena invited her in, and they talked for hours about their homes, and their people and the things they had lost when the Volanthi came. And Elena learned that Siren was a psychic who could sense the thoughts and feelings of others. "The Volanthi use our powers for their own purposes," Siren explained, "and they force us to read the minds of prisoners and rebels, and they punish us if we refuse. But they have never broken our spirits, only bent them. Then perhaps together we can unbend them," Elena said. And Siren made a sound that might have been agreement. That night, Siren did something no Velith had ever done for a non-Velith. And she reached into Elena's mind and created a shield around her thoughts, protecting her from the nightmares that the Volanthi implanted in champions to weaken them before the final trial. Elena slept deeply for the first time since arriving on Calaxis. And when she woke, she felt stronger than she had in days. More champions came to her in the days that followed, drawn by rumors of the human who built bridges instead of Walstarak. Bekashin came with scars covering his bronze skin and rage burning in his eyes. And he said that he had heard what she did for the Mordrith and wanted to know if she was truly as foolish as the story suggested. Elena did not argue with him, and instead she asked him about his people and his home and the family he had left behind. And Torek found himself telling her things he had never told anyone outside his own kind. By the end of their conversation, Torek had shown her the weak points in Volanthi armor, knowledge that his people had gathered over generations of fighting against their conquerors. And he said that he was giving her this gift because she had reminded him what it meant to be more than just a weapon. The Volanthi overseers noticed what was happening among the champions, and they did not like it at all. One of them confronted Elena in the corridor outside her chamber and demanded to know what she thought she was doing. "I am making friends," Elena said simply. The overseer's 4 eyes narrowed with anger, and he said, "There are no friends in the arena. There are only winners and losers, and the losers are dead." Elena looked at him without fear, and she said, "Maybe that is why you have ruled for so long, because you have made everyone believe that is the only way. But I come from a species that survived by working together, by helping each other, by refusing to accept that kindness is weakness." The overseer had no response to this, and he walked away with his gray robe swirling around him. But Elena knew that she had made an enemy more dangerous than any champion in the arena. That night, 11 surviving champions gathered in secret in one of the abandoned storage rooms beneath the arena, and they sat together in a circle and talked about what was to come. Cole was there with his limbs still wrapped but healing, and Siren was there with her silver mind touching all of theirs, and Torek was there with his 4 arms folded across his chest, and others had come too. Beings from species Elena had never heard of before this nightmare began. "The final trial will try to make us kill each other," Elena said, "and maybe that is unavoidable. Maybe the Volanthi will force us into combat no matter what we do. But I want you all to know that whatever happens, I am grateful that I met you, and I am proud to stand beside you." The champions looked at each other, and something passed between them that had not existed before, something that the Volanthi had tried very hard to prevent. And that something was hope for the first time in 2,000 years. The champions of the arena had begun to see each other not as enemies, but as allies. And none of them knew yet how much that would change everything. The arena was vast and dark, and filled with the sound of 100,000 Volanthi citizens who had come to watch the final trial. their voices creating a roar that shook the black sand beneath Elena's feet as she walked out into the fighting grounds with the other surviving champions. 11 of them remained from the 60 who had started, and they stood in the line facing the great throne that rose above the arena like a mountain of dark crystal. And on that throne sat Queen Selithra, the immortal ruler of the Dominion, the being who held the fate of humanity in her ancient hands. Elena had never seen the queen before this moment, and she found herself staring at a creature that seemed to be made of shadow and starlight, with features that shifted and changed in ways that hurt to look at, and with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across 12,000 years. Champions. The queen's voice filled the arena without effort, seeming to come from everywhere at once. You have survived the trials of body and mind and spirit, and now only the final test remains, combat. Until only one of you stands to speak before me. Elena felt Siren's mind touch hers gently, a whisper of comfort in the storm of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. And she felt Torek shift his weight beside her, ready for the battle that was about to begin. But then the queen rose from her throne, and the crowd fell silent so quickly that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. And something in the ancient ruler's expression suggested that what was about to happen was not what anyone expected. I have watched you closely in these trials, the queen continued, and I have seen something that interests me greatly. Something that has not happened in my arena for 2,000 years. She turned her shifting gaze toward Elena, and Elena felt the weight of those ancient eyes pressing down on her like a physical force. The human has done something remarkable, the queen said. She has turned enemies into allies. She has built connections where only hatred should exist. She has shown kindness in a place designed to destroy kindness. The crowd murmured with confusion, and Elena saw the Volanthi overseers exchange worried glances, because this was not how the final trial was supposed to go. Therefore, the queen announced, I am changing the rules of this trial, because I wish to test this unity that the human seems to believe in so strongly. She raised one hand, and the ground at the center of the arena began to shake and crack, and something massive began to rise from beneath the black sand. The champions will not fight each other, the queen declared. Instead, they will face the dread. Elena watched in horror as the creature emerged from the ground. A nightmare made flesh, a monster that seemed to be made from the worst fears of 100 different species. It was huge, bigger than any living thing Elena had ever seen, with scales that shifted colors in nauseating patterns and limbs that ended in claws and tentacles and things she had no names for. And it had too many eyes and too many mouths, and it radiated hunger like heat from a fire. The crowd erupted in screams and cheers, because the dread was legendary, a weapon the Volanthi had created from the genetic nightmares of every species they had conquered. A creature that had never been defeated in 10,000 years. Several champions fell to their knees in despair, and one of them simply turned and ran toward the arena walls, only to be caught by the dread's tentacles and torn apart before he could reach them. Torek turned to Elena with rage burning in his bronze face, and his forearms trembled with fury as he shouted, Your friendship has doomed us all, human. We should have been fighting each other, not making alliances that mean nothing against that thing. Elena looked at the dread as it finished killing the champion who had tried to flee, and she felt the cold weight of fear pressing down on her chest. And she knew that Torek was right, that no single champion could defeat this monster. But she also knew something else, something she had learned from her grandmother's stories and from the history of her people and from everything that humanity had accomplished across the long centuries of their existence. We fight together, she said, her voice steady despite the terror she felt, or we die alone. And I know which one I am choosing. She turned to face the other champions, and she saw fear in their eyes and doubt in their hearts, but she also saw something else. something that had not been there before she arrived on this world. She saw hope. "Listen to me," Elena said quickly, because the dread was already turning toward them, and they had only moments to act. "That thing is too big and too strong for any of us to fight alone. But together, we might have a chance. We each have different abilities and different strengths. And if we combine them, we might find a weakness." Kale stepped forward, his crystal body gleaming in the arena lights. And he said, "The human is right. I have studied the dread during my time here. And it has a thermal vent beneath its scales that releases excess heat. If we could strike that vent, we might be able to damage it." Siren closed her eyes and reached out with her psychic senses. And when she opened them again, she said, "I can feel its mind. It is not intelligent, only hungry. And I can link our thoughts together so we can coordinate without speaking." Torak looked at the monster, and then looked at Elena, and then made a sound that might have been a curse or a prayer. "Fine," he said. "We fight together, but when we die, I am blaming you." Human Elena smiled despite everything, and she said, "If we die, you can tell me I was wrong in whatever afterlife awaits us." The dread charged toward them with a roar that shook the arena, and the champions scattered into positions that seemed random, but were actually part of a plan that formed in their minds. Through Siren's psychic Lincoln moved to the front, using his crystal body as a shield, and the dread's claws struck him with enough force to crack his limbs, but not enough to shatter him completely. And while the monster was focused on him, Torak attacked from the side with all four arms swinging. Siren sent waves of confusion into the creature's mind, making it hesitate and stumble. And the other champions struck at its eyes and its joints and any weak point they could find. But it was not enough, because the dread was too powerful, too fast, too deadly. And one by one the champions began to fall. Ellen watched as one of her allies was crushed beneath the monster's foot, and she watched as another was impaled on its claws. And she felt Serene's link weakening as the Volith struggled to maintain the connection while fighting for her own life. Then she saw it. A gap in the dread's armor where its scales had shifted during the battle, and beneath that gap, she could see the glow of the thermal vent that Kale had described. She did not think about what she was doing, and she did not consider the danger. And she simply ran toward the monster while everyone else was trying to get away from it. She dodged beneath a sweeping tentacle and slipped between two massive legs and found herself beneath the creature's body. Where the vent pulsed with deadly heat, the gap in the armor was small. Too small for any of the other champions to fit through. But Elena was human. And humans were small and flexible, and very good at squeezing into places they should not be able to go. She climbed into the gap and felt the heat burning her skin. And she crawled through the monster's own body while its organs pulsed around her and its blood burned like acid. And she did not stop until she reached the thermal vent at the center of its being. She pulled the knife from her belt, a small blade that the Volanti had not bothered to take from her because they thought it was too weak to matter. And she drove it into the vent with all the strength she had left. The dread screamed, a sound that Elena would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. And it thrashed and convulsed and tried to shake her loose. But she held on, and she kept driving the knife deeper until the creature's movements began to slow. When the dread finally collapsed, Elena crawled out of its body and fell onto the black sand of the arena. And she lay there covered in monster blood and burns and wounds she could not count. She had lost her right arm somewhere in the creature's body, torn away by some internal defense she had not seen, and she was bleeding from a dozen places. And she could barely breathe, but she was smiling, because the dread was dead and her allies were alive, at least some of them. And she had proved that unity was stronger than Fergal dragged himself toward her with his cracked limbs barely holding together. And Torak limped over with two of his four arms hanging useless at his sides. And Siren stumbled through the sand with blood running from her nose and ears. 4 champions had survived, and they gathered around the small human woman who had saved them all. And they did not know what to say. The arena was completely silent, because no one had ever seen the dread defeated, and no one had ever seen champions work together like this. And no one knew what would happen next. Then the queen began to descend from her throne, and the entire dominion held its breath. Queen Silithra descended from her throne for the first time in 800 years. And the citizens of the Dominion watched in stunned silence as their immortal ruler walked down the great steps toward the blood-soaked sand of the arena. Lena lay where she had fallen, her body broken and her right arm gone, and her life slowly draining into the black ground beneath her. But she was still conscious, still aware, still fighting to stay alive for just a few more moments. The other surviving champions had formed a protective circle around her. Kale with his shattered crystal limbs, Torak with his 2 useless arms, Sirin with her bleeding eyes. And they stood over her like guardians, even though they could barely stand themselves. Queen moved through the arena with a grace that seemed to belong to another world entirely, her form shifting and changing with each step. And the crowd held its breath as she approached the champions who had accomplished the impossible. Valenti overseers rushed forward to intercept their ruler, their voices filled with concern and warning. "My queen," one of them said, "these creatures are dangerous. They should be restrained before you approach them. They have shown abilities that we did not expect." The queen did not even glance at the overseer, and she continued walking until she stood directly in front of the protective circle that surrounded. Elana Kale raised his remaining functional limb in a defensive gesture, his crystal body dim but still determined. And he said, "We will not let you harm her. She saved us all, and we will protect her, even if it costs us what little life we have left." The queen looked at him with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. And she said nothing for a long moment that stretched like eternity. Then she did something that shocked everyone in the arena. She knelt in the sand beside Elena Vasquez, bringing herself down to the level of the small human woman who had defied everything the Dominion believed about weakness and strength. Elena looked up at the face of the queen, and she saw features that shifted like clouds and eyes that burned like dying stars. And she felt no fear, only a strange peace that seemed to come from knowing she had done everything she could. "You should not be alive," the queen said, her voice soft enough that only Elena and the champions around her could hear. "You should have died in the first trial, or the second, or the third. By every measure my people use to judge worth, you are nothing. A small creature from a young species that could not even defend its own world." Elena tried to speak, but blood filled her mouth, and she could only make a weak sound that might have been agreement or defiance. The queen reached out with one shifting hand and touched Elena's face gently. And where her fingers touched, Elena felt warmth spreading through her broken body, not healing her wounds, but easing her pain. "And yet here you are," the queen continued, "lying in the sand of my arena, having killed a creature that no champion has defeated in 10,000 years. Having done the one thing I never expected to see again in my long life." She looked up at the other champions who surrounded Elena, and she saw how they stood ready to defend her, how they had given pieces of themselves to try to save her, how they had become something more than enemies forced to fight in a cruel game. "I have ruled for 12,000 years," the queen said, rising to her feet and addressing not just the champions, but the entire arena. "And I have seen countless species break, and I have seen countless species bend, and I have seen countless species beg for mercy that I was not inclined to give." Her voice grew louder, carried by the ancient technology of the arena until it reached every ear in the vast space. "I have seen courage," she continued. "The courage of warriors who fought to the death rather than surrender. The courage of leaders who sacrificed themselves for glory. The courage of parents who died to protect their children." She paused, and her shifting gaze returned to Elena, who lay still and pale on the sand below. But I have never seen courage like this. The queen knelt again beside Elena, and this time she lifted the human woman's remaining hand in her own, a gesture of respect that no Volanthi ruler had ever shown to a conquered species. "Your courage is the boldest here," she said, and the words echoed through the arena like thunder. "Not because you did not fear, for I could see the fear in your eyes from the moment you arrived on my world. Not because you did not break, for I watched you scream in the trial of pain and weep in the trial of endurance. Not because you did not doubt, for I know you questioned yourself every moment of every day." She stood and helped Elena sit up, supporting the wounded human with strength that belied her ethereal form. "Your courage is the boldest here because you looked upon despair and chose hope. You looked upon enemies and chose to see allies. You looked upon death and chose to make it mean something more than just another ending." The Volanthi overseers were whispering urgently to each other, their gray faces showing fear and confusion, because they understood that something fundamental was about to change. For 2,000 years, the queen announced to the arena, "I have searched for a species worthy of standing beside the Volanthi as equals, a species that understood true strength, and for 2,000 years, I have been disappointed by warriors who knew only how to fight and conquerors who knew only how to destroy." She gestured to Elena and the champions who surrounded her. "Today, a human woman and a handful of broken champions showed me what I had forgotten. That the greatest strength is not the power to defeat your enemies, but the wisdom to turn enemies into friends. That the greatest courage is not dying for your beliefs, but living for them in a world that punishes such living." The queen raised her voice until it seemed to shake the very foundations of Galaxis. "The human species will not serve in the mines. They will not bow. They will not be slaves to an empire that has forgotten what true strength looks like. From this day forward, they stand as equals. And any who challenge this decree will face my personal displeasure." The silence that followed was the deepest silence Elena had ever heard. The silence of an entire civilization having its foundations shaken. The silence of beings who had always believed they were superior, learning that they might have been wrong. Then Kale dropped to one knee beside Elena, and his grinding voice spoke words that would change the galaxy forever. "I stand with the human," he said. "Now and always." Tarek knelt as well, his bronze skin gleaming in the arena lights, and he said, "My people have fought the Volanthi for generations, but we will follow this human, because she has shown us a better way." Siren knelt last, her silver skin catching the light like moonlight on water, and she said, "My mind has touched hers, and I have seen what she dreams of. A galaxy where no species conquers another, where all beings stand together against the darkness. And I believe in that dream." Elena looked at her friends, her allies, her family born from shared suffering and hope, and she felt tears running down her face, even though she had thought she had no more tears left to cry. "We never fight alone," she whispered. And those 4 words became a promise and a prayer and a prophecy all at once. The queen smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in centuries. And she said, "No, human, you never do. And that is why your species will change everything." 50 years later, when the United Species Alliance faced a threat that made the Volanthi Dominion look like children playing at Empire, it was Elena Vasquez's words that rallied the fleets of 100 worlds, and when the histories of the galaxy were written, they all began with the same story. The story of a small human woman who walked into an arena designed to break her and walked out having changed the universe, because courage is not the absence of fear. And strength is not the ability to stand alone. Courage is the choice to hope when hope seems foolish. And strength is the wisdom to know that together we can face anything. We never fight alone, and that is humanity's greatest gift to the stars.